welcome to this Women Deliver Live Town Hall in collaboration with Every Woman, Every Child. I'm Andrea Sankey from TRT World News. And we are gathering here at the Digital Media Zone at the UN General Assembly, of course, in New York. As we know, world leaders and a number of activists, as well as very influential people, have gathered here to explore and tackle some of the world's toughest challenges. And arguably, there is no greater challenge in the world's focus right now than that of the spiraling refugee crisis, the worst we've seen since World War II. This crisis is particularly detrimental to women and girls, to their security, their health, and their education. So joining us here on this stage to talk about the issues girls and women are facing are immediately to my right, Princess Sarah Zeid, who is a passionate advocate of women's rights and maternal health, Royal Princess, I should say, of Jordan. Thanks so much for joining us. To her right, Alaa Murabit, who is a medical doctor, a global sustainable development advocate, and UN High-Level Commissioner of Health, Employment, and Economic Growth. And we also have Ashley Wolfington, who is the Senior Reproductive Health Advisor at the International Rescue Committee, and award-winning filmmaker Chris Temple, whose latest film, Salam Neighbor, sheds light on the daily hardships and hopes of displaced refugees. So thank you, all four of you, for taking the time to talk about this very pressing issue. Let me begin with the bigger picture, really. Sarah, I'll start with you. Why is it really important? Why does it matter that we actually discuss women and girls' rights in connection with the refugee crisis?
And not just kick our panelists, our fellow panelists, I apologize. Well, first of all, I am the everywhere portion of Every Woman, Every Child. For far too long, women, children, reproductive health, newborns, adolescents, they have all been largely forgotten by the global juggernaut that was the MDGs. And so as we retooled the work of the international community looking forward to the Sustainable Development Goals, we were determined to include humanitarian and fragile settings into the work that we do. If the majority of preventable maternal deaths are taking place in maternity and amongst children under 5 and newborns, then this is where we have to focus our priorities. Women are, in every setting, they are hit first, they are hit longest, hardest, but they are also the strongest asset and partner that we have in global peace, security, development, reknitting the fabric of families and communities back together again. And so now we have a 5-year program. We have objectives, we have a program, we have this extraordinary community of partners that are pulling behind the work that we are doing for women and girls in refugee settings. We call them the 3 Cs: climate, contagion, and conflict. And for too long, women have not even been in the center of our thoughts or of our conversations. They've been totally sidelined and marginalized, and now we are fighting to turn that tide. And we have to listen to them, we have to partner with them, we have to be guided by their needs.
And Alaa, let me ask you, what excuses do you hear for the marginalization of women and girls in issues, not just the refugee crisis, but in politics, in everything? Why is it so easily ignored?
You know, for some I call them excuses, and for some I just call them a different perspective. I think we all bring to our work our own lived experiences and our own identities. And I think for many of us, if we have not been in that position, we tend not to recognize the importance of inclusive voices. And so if we have the privilege of always being heard, we assume everybody else has that same privilege unless they're not working hard enough. So the most common excuse I hear is, well, they're just not speaking up. They're just not coming, as though we have the same pathway that they do. So I remember when I first started my organization in Libya, you know, it was kind of expected from everybody around the table that it would be as easy for me to show up at their meetings that were at times that were not as easy for me to make it, or in people's living rooms, etc., as it was for them. And so there wasn't really the recognition of a lot of the limitations that I had and that I had to overcome, and that women everywhere around the world overcome. Another common excuse, I think, is particularly in conflict and post-conflict settings, that first we need to worry about security. So let's deal with safety and security. Let's deal with disarmament. Let's get all the guns out, and then we're going to talk about the women. And I think if we look just at empirical evidence alone, we don't even need to go into anecdotal stories, which actually provide a wonderful array of a collection of experience. But from empirical evidence alone, we know that the inclusion of women actually leads to more stable and secure and safe environments for a longer period of time. If women are included in peace processes, you have a 35% more likelihood that a peace process will last a minimum of 15 years. If they are not included, which is the vast majority, peace processes, 90% don't last 5 years. So I think we need to rethink what comes first. If we're really saying security and stability have to come before inclusion, respect, reconciliation, then I think we're misunderstanding where most conflict stems from. So I think really the key is having everybody at the table, and the most common excuses are just that we physically can't. And those are cop-outs.
Ashley, I see you nodding in agreement. Share your perspective with the International Rescue Committee.
Is this? Oh, it is on. So I just wanted to pick up on the point that you were making about waiting. You know, we keep saying let's. You know, I come from this as an implementer of sexual and reproductive health programs, and those. We hear a lot of excuses about those. Let's wait to bring those on board when things settle down, when the crisis calms down, when we can bring in the right skilled people, when we can bring in all the supplies and equipment and do everything the way it was done before. And the truth of the matter is that those women and those adolescent girls can't wait. Some of them are already pregnant. Many of them need access to contraceptives. And many of them, you know, if you do ask them, if you do take the time to sit down and ask them what they want the same things. They want access to good education for their children. They want to have control over resources, so some cash that they can use to buy things for their family. And they want to have choices. They want to have control over when and how they have children, particularly at a time where things are in such flux and they can't really wait any longer.
It is that dire, because essentially you're creating a generation of girls and women whose lives have been destroyed, and they are in turn creating another generation of children that are born in these camps whose lives will also in part be derailed because of our lack of action now.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of times what the crisis exposes is that a lot of these issues were already there, that gender inequality was already was in place. And that women might not have really had good access to health care. You know, in northern Nigeria, where we're responding right now, and you see it in the news, it's affected by Boko Haram, and millions of people are displaced within and outside of Nigeria. The baseline contraceptive use was only 3%. So then you put this crisis on top of that, and you separate women from health services, and you can see what kind of second disaster that creates as far as their access to health care.
Alaa, if you had a comment, go ahead, or else I'm going to move.
Well, I actually just wanted to pick up on something you said, which I think is very key, is that it really highlights the existing and underlying inequalities. And I think that can be applied not only to women and girls in conflict, but to the whole situation. I mean, really what we've seen from this refugee situation for the past 5 years is really the inequalities of the global governance system, is the fact that some people are left behind, even when we sit in places like the UN and claim they won't be. And that hits women and girls the hardest, but we also have to be thinking, if this is how we propose governance should work, if this is what we're saying matters, if these are the priorities we have, then really how strong are we being the ones to speak up on it now? I think it really comes into the highlighting of the underlying inequalities is so important, speaking about the way in which it's going to affect the future generation of men and how that will affect young women, because really we're trying to repair broken things in 20, 30, 40 years, broken systems, broken structures, broken lives, and to me it just makes more sense for us to really get it together now and start working on it. And a lot of that comes to us admitting that there are some serious flaws in our global governance systems.
Definitely. Let me move on to Chris now. And your latest film, Salam Neighbor, really, as we said, sheds light on the daily hardships of the everyday people, their loss of hope, being in refugee camps for years and years at a time, really with no end in sight. So I'd like to take a look at actually a clip from Salam Neighbor. I'm hoping we have it technically. Let's take a look.
ولا شيء ما جبت معي غير عباية
I think we may not have it.
بس ما جبت معي غير هدول الغراضين بالطريق بردت قلت لها لمرة قلت لكم شان الله والله العظيم ميتة من البرد أعطيني كنزة أعطتني كنزة ولبستها ضلني هيك امشي بالزعترة تلم اكياس النايلة اللي بيلمون يسوون اياها بالمفوضيه لما من الطريق يضحكوا علي الناس بس ما يعني ما عادي
Oh, do you want to wait till the clip is finished and then we'll come back live, or? Oh, I see. Explain what they're seeing now.
Yeah, so I will again in a second, but it's about a woman who's been collecting trash around Zaatari camp, just the extra bags from UNHCR and others, and putting them into beautiful art pieces. And she's actually now teaching other young girls about art and creativity in the camp, working at an IRC center. And so it's really just even the power of art and creativity for healing, and for her being really the first time in her life she's been empowered to be kind of the leader of her family. So I'll talk more about it in a second.
الحمد لله ساعدتنا على العيشة هون الحمد لله.
Great. I'm being told the clip is finished.
الحمد لله.
Okay, Chris, your movie highlights the work of Ali, who is a Syrian refugee, turning trash she finds around the refugee camp into works of art. Tell us about her, and first of all, why you were drawn to her, and what difference this, what seems like a small thing to do, has made not just to her life, but how it's affected refugees across the camp.
No, completely. And I mean, hopefully her strength and energy comes across in this clip a little bit for you guys as well. But she's an incredible woman, forced to flee Syria like so many. Has been in this camp now for about 3 years. When she arrived, she speaks a lot about her depression and her inability to overcome the loss of her son back in Syria, and her inability to regain a sense of normalcy. So what she did actually was she would begin, if you looked at her caravan inside of the camp, it is full of this beautiful artwork all around the inside. There's drawings, there's paper, there's incredible crafts all around the inside of her caravan, the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And so when we asked her about it, she told us this story that you guys saw there a little bit, that she'd been collecting this beautiful art, or this trash, and making it into beautiful art. And I think what the most powerful part was that for her, it allowed her a feeling of purpose. It allowed her something to keep her going and overcome this tragedy. And that, I think, happens especially for so many women and girls in these camps, is there's so much isolation that it causes. It causes really a lot of depression and psychosocial issues that the IRC and others are key to combating. But even you can take it for, in her case, as she started learning and doing this craft work for herself, she then even began teaching other young girls in the camp at an IRC center, allowing this trickle-down effect of her type of healing. And it even then changed her husband's perceptions of her as a leader in the family, because she started getting paid for this work. So she was then the breadwinner of the family for the first time in her life, and her husband was excited by it. And that actually started changing these gender norms a little bit inside of the camp. And in some ways, we saw that this crisis could even be an opportunity to change and to move beyond some of these fractured situations in conflict zones that that are happening. So it was incredible. She's a wonderful person. We actually send her WhatsApp messages frequently, so she'll get to see this afterwards.
Fantastic. It's beautiful to hear stories like that, but the sad reality, and something I just picked up on that you said, is that she's been there for 3 years. That sounds like a horrendous amount of time. But Sarah, as you know, there are people spending lifetimes in these refugee camps.
Well, UNHCR says that the average amount of time to be a refugee is 20 years. And 20 years is not an emergency. For a woman or a girl, this could be your entire reproductive life, from being born, going through adolescence and puberty, to giving birth yourself. And so, the entire system has to rethink the way that we look at and respond to and listen to the needs of men, women, children in the various settings. And also understand migration, refugees, that in Jordan, the majority of refugees are not in a camp. In Lebanon, there are no camps. We're dealing with a completely different world order, rapid urbanization, and then we're going to start moving into climate migrants and these sorts of things. We have to be so nimble and innovative about how we work. And I've got to doom and gloom over here. My most recent experience in Zaatari was in the labor and delivery ward, which is always one of my favorite places, and talking to a woman who had just given birth to her 8th child. And beautiful little boy, all wonderful and healthy. The reality is that she would take her 8th child and move back into her container with no heating, no air conditioning. And so in this small container, I love the word caravan, container, 10 people are living in this container. And then you have the family, the extended family, and the community that joins in as well. And where is the latrine? They don't have one in their container. How do you care for your children, your newborn baby, those 7 other children, even if they have access to some sort of schooling, but 3 hours a day? What are they doing the rest of the time? What foundations are we setting out for future generations? And where are they going to go afterwards?
I'd like to move on to another issue, if you didn't have a comment, Alaa, because when they have challenges that they're facing, that you talked about, the lack of a latrine, the lack of the basic sanitation, they can talk about that. They can complain about that to whatever authorities may be available, if they are. But there is another issue that involves greater shame than that, and that is their sexual health. And the lack of transparency, the lack of data, actually, that we're starting to see more and more of what the secret challenges women face in refugee camps, whereby the spread of sexually transmitted diseases is becoming a major health problem. The failure to secure options for birth control in camps has led to a number of unwanted pregnancies where these challenges are just constantly compounded. I know the International Rescue Committee deals with a lot of the health issues. Are we going to see more attention paid? I mean, it's hard enough in developed countries to have the focus put on sexual health, yes. So what's being done for the thousands of women that need that medical attention and need to be able to talk about sexual violence and other sexual health issues?
So first, I wanted to just give a shout out to Princess Sarah and her work on the Every Woman, Every Child, Everywhere work stream, because I think that the first thing is that we're talking about it. And we're breaking the silence around a lot of these issues, and that's bringing it into the mainstream and making it easier to at least talk about. But we're also in a comfortable setting here. We're sort of all on the same page when it comes to that. But I think one of the things that we talk about as implementers is it's too easy and simple to say we just need more aid. We actually need better aid. And sexual and reproductive health is probably the best test kitchen that we have for finding better aid and better solutions. And I think that, we know a lot about what works. It's just not getting to the right women in the right places. And definitely not reaching adolescent populations because of all the taboos around talking about sexual and reproductive health among young people. Everywhere I travel in the world, from Jordan to Chad to Myanmar, people say, we cannot talk about adolescent reproductive health in my setting. And I say, in my setting, in New York, it's also really hard to talk about. So we need to just be focusing on what we know is effective, providing really good sexual and reproductive health services that include contraception, that make sure that every single woman is able to have a skilled person deliver her baby. We need to have better access to things like safe abortion care, which is even harder to talk about, and absolutely making sure that all of those services are reaching adolescent populations, and we're talking to them about sex before they become sexually active. And none of that is easy, but we're making it happen, and then we need to be sharing that data out. And it's our responsibility also to be sharing those stories out.
Go ahead, Alaa.
Well, so just to piggyback on both of these wonderful and brilliant women sitting next to me, I think we all also have to recognize that this is not an outside-in solution. Health in particular, health and education, I would argue, in particular, are inside solutions. We have phenomenal doctors and nurses and teachers among refugee populations who are unable to work, who do not get the support, the papers, the resources to work. And I mean, we continue to talk about where we're going to the situation we're going to have in 5, 10, 15, 20 years. I know for a fact that if I was forced out of my home, if I have trained, and if I am trained in a space that I am not even allowed to contribute to my own community, my own family in, then of course there's going to be psychosocial problems. Of course people are going to stay in containers for 7, 10 hours a day, lamenting about their lives. So I think we have to also be very aware of the political solutions. If people have the qualifications, then people should be getting the resources. We do not need doctors coming in from every other part of the world when we have doctors who cannot work there. I mean, for example, in Lebanon, where there are no camps, they should be given papers and be allowed to work. We need to really look at the situation that we have and say who is most able and most effective and most legitimate within that community. And it is always women who you have grown up with. It is, you always will want to go to the woman who treated you in your own community, or to the woman who you have known or speaks your language if you're a refugee in Turkey, or if you're a refugee in a part of the country, in the part of the world that you can't speak the same language. So I think we also have to recognize that there's a phenomenal amount of capacity, and that we're just genuinely overlooking it.
But who needs to do this? Who needs to sit up and build the bureaucracy and administration that could help deliver these services from inside? Go ahead, Sarah.
We have to start by being honest, actually, and honestly look, actually, at what, where are we trying to go? This is what we want to achieve, and work our way backwards. Because Human Rights Watch issued a report recently about the obstacles and barriers to education of children, both Lebanese but particularly refugee children in Lebanon. And largely, the obstacles that they talked about had nothing to do with education itself, with classrooms and books and pencils, whatever it is, the hardware. It was about protection issues. It was about the ability of a Syrian teacher to educate because of mismatching curriculums and so on. So what is the problem? Is the problem the curriculum? Is the problem the transportation? To exactly as you said, to keep throwing money at these things without the data, without the evidence, without fully acknowledging honestly where the problems are and how we need to unravel those. And largely, they are not what is in front of your face. They're all sorts of other things.
And we also, I think, adding on to that, being honest with ourselves, we also have to look at the resources that we do. The resources that we do have, where are they going? Because, I mean, we're putting a lot of money into security, but it's really about containment. It's really about keeping them in a specific place and away from specific borders. It's not about protecting within camps, and it's not about protecting refugee populations in other countries. So if we really want to talk about women's protection and women's support, then let's start talking about security within camps. Let's start talking about when she goes to the toilet that is not near her container and she gets sexually assaulted on the way, we need people there. We don't need people at every single border making sure that they don't get into every other country for millions of dollars a day if we cannot protect the people in those spaces. So I think we have to be very honest about who is our priority here. If we're going to say we're talking about refugees, we're putting money into the refugee crisis, etc., then we're not putting money into making sure the refugee crisis doesn't come to us, because that's a very different thing.
Ashley and Chris, 2 minutes. Let me get your final thoughts. Ashley, go ahead.
So just finally, one thing, I loved the story that you were sharing about the people that you met in the camp, because I think we were, to me, it highlights the power of asking the right questions and really listening to the voices of women and young people. But I think we have a responsibility then. I know I do as an implementer, I feel it, that I have a responsibility to act and to ask donors for more and to ask them for the right things. And so I think that is at least the commitment that I'm making is to listen more, make fewer assumptions, and then with the power that I have, because I have access to all these people, is to do more to speak out on behalf of those people.
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, and I want to add just two quick things. One, just on the honesty thing of, if we want to be really honest, 90% of Syrian refugees are in 4 countries surrounding Syria. So where do we need to support? We need to support those countries: Jordan, Lebanon, Turkey, Iraq. And if we're not providing that capacity there and realizing that the local population needs to be supported in that same way, that's the key to the double employment. And the amazing woman we met, her name is Gassoon. She was a single mom of 3 children living in Mafraq outside of the camp. And she was a nurse back in Syria. You talk about these skills. She was a prime example of this, but she couldn't legally work in Jordan. And she told us about, hey, look, I'm friends now with a lot of my Jordanian neighbors, and they're struggling too. This is really hard. They're taking, rent prices have quadrupled. You're seeing a lot of crowded hospitals, a lot of issues with education availability. And so when we look at where do we really need to help, getting into those countries and realizing rebuilding in those locations is where we get those win-wins, is where opportunities out of crisis can come, and it can unlock that potential of incredible women like Ali or like Gassoon.
Okay, Chris, I'm going to let you have the last word because very unfortunately we're out of time. That half hour flew by. So I'd like to thank all 4 of our panelists so much for joining us for this very insightful discussion on women and girl refugees and the changes that we need to make. And I'd like to thank our viewers as well for joining us on Women Deliver Live. Stay tuned with us throughout the day. We'll be back with much, much more. Bye-bye.